Good evening and welcome to this edition, which is about talking about politics in relation to women in the context of a fledgling democracy. This series, for those of you who have joined us on previous occasions, is about amplifying voices on Africa, issues around transformation, covering all segments of the population, all social classes, and all sectors. And in the past, we've been able to cover two former heads of states, President Kufuor of Ghana, President Obasanjo of Nigeria. We've been able to cover women activists, NSAS, Aisha Yusuf. Last Sunday, we covered the First Lady of Ekiti State, Dr. Bisi Fayemi. We've covered religious leaders, the head of the Ansarudin movement, Sheikh Ahmad, Bishop Hassan Kuka. We focused on popular culture, Tunde Kelani of Mainframe, who has joined us today, Ebenezer Obey, we've covered him. We've spoken about Nigerian politics, inviting the head of the Awolowo Foundation, Mr. Kumbo Dosmo Awolowo, who spoke about, we've covered education, inviting the president of ASU, who spoke for 4 hours. And next week, we'll be talking about the secessionist movement in Cameroon, inviting the main actors, including some of the officers in exile. And a week after, we want to talk about traditional institutions. And we have invited Yoshimawe of Ondo, a former medical doctor who is now the king of the Ondo kingdom. This panel is unusual because I'm not going to moderate it as I've done on previous occasion. The moderation is yielded to somebody who's superior to me, the well-known Ireti Bakari Yusuf, an online personality and TV broadcaster who has been in this business for over 30 years, doing management, and our commitment to the promotion of the empowerment of women is very well known. A major player in the advocacy against sexual and gender-based violence. And she's pioneered and led NGO movements, No More 234 NG, which is very popular. And the NGO, as you are aware, has been able to manage and run so many campaigns for justice, for women's rights, and for fighting issues around gender imbalance. She's contributed to the second largest film industry in the world, Nollywood, and she's done creative works, My Nina Simone Trip, Hear What Naija, and so many. I'll be handing over this moderation to her, and she will introduce the panelists. Thank you, Ireti, for moderating this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Super. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. I think you're being far too generous, far too generous about what I've done. I wish to have done most of those things, but never mind. I claim it anyway. Right. My name's Ireti Bakari Yusuf, as Prof said. It's actually my honor because there's nothing that I've done that comes close to what he's achieved, not least bringing all of us together here today. So it's actually my honor to be hosting this, to be moderating these women. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I feel blessed. I feel like, there's a place where you get as a woman. There's heaven and there's a woman's heaven. And right now, this is as close as it gets to a woman's heaven. So, the audience, what do I promise you? I promise you that my main priority is about keeping you engaged. Yes, these women have lots to share with us, but honestly, this is about you. This is about entertaining you. This is about keeping you engaged. This is about enlightening you and making sure you enjoy and you go away thinking, I got more questions for Prof. So you can throw it at him. Don't mail me. I don't know much. I'm just here to talk to these people. So we're going to have a fabulous time. We've got around about 2 hours or so. Okay. So let's get started. I should start from, allow me to just say, I believe one of our panelists had to drop off. Unfortunately, something came up. So we only have the three. But still yet, trust me, this is woman's heaven. And I mean that seriously. Right, so I'm going to start alphabetical order to introduce each one of them. We have my dear sister, Aisha Osori. Aisha is a lawyer and a writer with experience in the public, non-profit, and private sectors. She is currently the executive director at Open Society Initiative for West Africa. We call it OSIWA, a grant-making and advocacy organization. She is a published writer, and her latest books are Love Does Not Win Election. Have you read it yet? Too Good to Die, Third Term, and the Myth of the Indispensable Man in Africa. Now, the former is about her experience contesting the political party primaries in 2014, whilst the latter is about the 10-year elongation campaigns by incumbent presidents and the damage done to state institutions in Africa. Aisha has collaborated on a series of children's textbooks on social studies and social studies used in primary schools in Nigeria and used to keep a weekly newspaper for 5 years. Ms. Osori, if you're nasty, is a regular commentator on radio and television and has been involved in numerous campaigns to improve social justice, elections, and good governance. Ms. Osori is an Eisenhower and Aliwa Fellow, graduated with law degrees from the University of Lagos and Harvard Law School, and has a master's in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School. She is licensed to practice law in Nigeria and the state of New York. I will go to Dr. Chedo. You're there, Chichi? Hello. Right. Dr. Wanko's focus. Sorry, let me start from the beginning. Dr. Chedo Wanko teaches with the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and African Studies program, and is a senior fellow at the SAIS Foreign Policy Institute. She is also the director of the women-led program at SAIS, where she supervises the practicum projects conducted in partnership with public, private, non-governmental, and intergovernmental organizations across the world towards advancing women's studies, women's status, and advancing gender equality goals across communities. These partnerships have produced successful projects in various countries across 5 continents. Dr. Wanko's work focuses on gender justice and development, identity and politics, women's political participation and leadership, and the legislature. She has published her work in the Social Politics Journal and Democracy in Africa, the Study Political Journal, the Washington Post, Democracy in Africa, and others. She also co-edited a book on the Nigerian National Assembly and has written several book chapters, including on Transformations and Continuities, Women's Political Participation in Nigeria, in the Global Handbook of Women's Political Rights and on Women's Struggle for Independence, in the Oxford Handbook for Nigerian Politics, amongst others. Dr. Nwankwo is a fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development in Nigeria and consults for the World Bank, Bloomberg Philanthropies, Co-Impact, and Premium Time Center for Investigative Journalism, and on gender matters, women's political participation, and women's economical development. She has 2 decades of experience working in the corporate and non-governmental sectors, including consulting for the New York government on community integration for persons living with HIV/AIDS. Dr. Nwankwo holds a BA in Mass Communications from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and an MSc in Mass Communications and Public Relations from the University of Lagos. She received an MSc in Political Science in 2012 and a doctorate in Political Science and International Relations in 2016 from the University of Delaware, United States. Now, to introduce my not the least important panelist, I may just warn you, Nse Ufot, who we are pleased to have here today, joining us all the way from America, including the same as Dr. Chedo. Nse Ufot is the Chief Executive Officer of the New Georgia Project and its affiliate, New Georgia Project Action Fund. Nse leads both organizations with a data-informed approach and a commitment to developing tools that leverage technology to make it easier for every voter to engage in every election. Nse and her team are also developing Georgia's homegrown talent by training and organizing local activists across the state. She has dedicated her life and career to working on civil, human, and workers' rights issues, and leads 2 organizations whose complementary aim is to strengthen Georgia's democracy. Under Nse's leadership, NGP has registered over 500,000 Georgians to vote. Right, my panelists, welcome. Nse, Aisha, and Chichi. How are you ladies doing?
Wonderful. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
The pleasure is mine. The pleasure is mine. Thank you. And Aisha, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I hope everybody can hear me.
Super.
Pleasure to be here.
So, thank you. So the audience today, you know what the title is called, The Women Speak. So that's the first place I want to go to each and every one of my panelists. And I'm going to start with you first, Dr. Chichi. When you saw that title, Women Speak, what was the first thing that came to your head in 30 seconds?
Well, I think precisely that, right? Women speak. Women will be speaking as women have been speaking for centuries, right? And so the fact that women will be speaking is really nothing, there's nothing new to women speaking. I think perhaps the question we should be asking is, who will be listening? Is anybody listening?
Excellent, thank you. Aisha, what was the first thing that came to your head when you saw the title, Women Speak?
I think it was maybe along the lines of what Chichi said, that yeah, who'll speak but who's listening. But I also thought it was a bit cheeky just in terms of thinking about women being talked over constantly in the public space, in meetings. And so saying the women speak is sort of like a call for people to listen effectively, make sure they're not speaking over us, but actually listening to us when we speak.
Thank you. Nse, what came to mind?
Yeah, honestly, the same thing. I usually don't make a habit of repeating the thing that my fellow panelists have said, but they're absolutely right that women have been speaking since we could. And that the question is, who is listening, right? Women have been leading, quite frankly, our homes, our communities, businesses for quite some time. But do we recognize that as effective leadership? And I'm excited to have that conversation today.
Wonderful. So, dear audience, I hope you're listening. I hope you will be listening intensely. Let's get to it. Right. My first question, and I'm going to go to you, Aisha, for this, is so what I've done is I've divided the questions into strategy, reform, and the future. And that's how I hope we're going to go forward. So, Aisha, to you, I say, this is a kind of scene setting for us to engage the situation as now. Where are we today since the beginning of the Fourth Republic in Nigeria?
I feel like asking how many hours do we have for this question, because I feel
You
like
only
just
have
setting
3
the scene.
minutes.
Yeah, I know. No, I'll be quick. I'm sure I won't spend all that time, but it's a huge question. I mean, I'm thinking, are we setting the context just for where women's political participation? Are we setting the context for democracy in general, which is really difficult to discuss women's political participation without actually discussing the health of our democracy in Nigeria, because the two are tied together. I will say, though, that now, 20 plus years into the Fourth Republic that began in 1999, we will say that in terms of women's political participation, as a summary, it's low, it's abysmal. And that's not because women aren't trying. It's not because more women aren't running for office. It's just because our elections, for one, are not becoming more inclusive in terms of the results. The political terrain is getting a lot more hostile, not just for women, but for everybody who's not considered part of the status quo. So for young people, for women, for technical people, people who don't fall into the traditional realm of what a politician should be. So we've seen in the beginning of 1999, if I focus just on women's political participation, that we started slowly in terms of our representation in the National Assembly, even though this was in the middle of the Millennium Development Goals, which had called on countries to have at least 35% women represented in their national assemblies, in Congress, and the legislature, because this was the minimum that was, by academic research, had shown that you need at least 35% women in the legislature to make a meaningful difference to the types of policies and laws that are coming out that will influence the lives of women, who in most countries make up at least half, sometimes more, of the population. We peaked in terms of our representation in National Assembly in 2007 with a little under 10% of the legislators. And since then, it's been a steady decline that has seen at the last election cycle in 2019, representation of women falling to below 4% of the National Assembly, which is loosely made up of 109 senators and 360 legislators.
You have 30 seconds left.
So that's where we are now. So women's political, we've never had any female elected as a governor. We've never had any female as a major contestant for a major political party. And we've, so it's been abysmal, so to speak, if we sum it that way. And our democracy is not improving, partly because of that, because it's not inclusive, it's not representative, and it keeps people out.
Thank you, Aisha. And say, where do you think we are today? Now, I know we talk about the Fourth Republic in terms of Nigeria, but I think you have a strong enough global view, especially of what's going on in Nigeria. Where do you think we are today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are times that people often don't recognize the moment that they're in as they're sort of living and working through it. But I think that there are some early lessons, some context that we are living and trying to maintain a democracy or democratic republic in. I think that one, the rise of social media, I think in a lot of ways has made the world smaller. I think it has made campaigning and getting ideas out and pushing against the boundaries of sort of existing knowledge much more democratic. But along with that, have we also witnessed the rise in misinformation and disinformation and the impact on, how young people who are learning about governing and government and their role in government, that the wells where we get our information from are being poisoned. And so thinking about digital media literacy, as you think about infrastructure and institutions, right? The press, et cetera. So where do people go to get information? How do we understand what's happening around the world? When do we stop trusting what we hear from our elected officials? And I think that that's a real concern. When I think about movement organizations, grassroots organizations, democracy entrepreneurs, that we are not yet at a place where we are effectively combating misinformation and disinformation. It's still a growing number of us that even recognize it as a threat. So I think that that's where we are. I think two, along with the rise in, misinformation and again, the poisoning of the wells where we get our information, I think we're also watching a global rise in authoritarianism, and some populist conservatism, that it's not just Donald Trump in the US, that the role of police and policing, in the US, it's in the context of the First Amendment, so freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom of the press, that these are all real questions that we are asking ourselves in this moment, like whether or not these are virtues that are worth defending, and how do we do that in an age where, again, having a platform and having your thoughts amplified is much easier than it's ever been, no matter how trash your opinions are.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Inse. Dr. Chichi, given what Inse's just said, right, with regards to social media, fake news, etc., can you juxtapose with that with where we are now, especially in relation to Nigeria, okay, and and how we're faring, if you like?
Right. So I will echo what Aisha and Nse have, what they've just said. But I also want to put this in context, right? Of saying where are we? Like, what's the scorecard, right? And I think if just because Nse and Aisha have so eloquently, detailed the reality of what we're dealing with at this point, perhaps let me just depart just a little bit and say that it might not be all doom and gloom at this point, because there are some, silos, some bright spots, right? So there is, I would suggest that there is a robustness in civil society participation, as well as in civic awakening and awareness, right? And I would say that, yes, part of this has been in reaction to the excesses of the state. Part of it has been in reaction to the worsening socioeconomic conditions of people. However, I think the good part of it is that it's created a robustness, which does seem to exist side by side, what we might term an uncivil society, right? These pockets of political contention that seem to fall outside of what we might be looking to have, right? These, as we call them in Nigeria, secessionist movements, the extremist movements and all that. But clearly there is ample ground to expand in democratic participation. And while these political contentions, these various kinds of political contentions might lead to a form of electoral restriction, right? As some of these people are calling, right? The IPOB members and all that, which is clearly problematic. I think what we should have been more worried about is political apathy, which seems not to be the case in Nigeria at the point, right? especially with the just concluded or the ongoing, although it's speculating underneath, NSAS movement and the NSAS ideology or agenda, right? So I will think that to place this in context, yes, the state of our nation is really weak. We have a whole lot to go. But I would also suggest that the structures of democracy that have been built since the return to democracy since from 1999, as Aisha clearly detailed, have continued to, they have taken root somewhat, right? And they seem to be fighting against the tendency of
I have to hurry up.
Of government to close up the states, the space for contestation. So yes, there's disinformation and communication, gaps. There are all these other gaps in economic participation and political participation, but the space is expanding for robustness and more participation.
Excellent, thank you. In that case, I'm going to then ask you, how would you assess the health of Nigeria's democracy today with regards to its implications for more diverse and inclusive democracy, or if you like, leadership? Inse.
I think that it is, in the hospital after being beat up, after being jumped by a few bad actors. But I think that the doctors are going to be women and women leaders and youth and young people. The only reason why I still am fiercely optimistic about the future of the Nigerian Republic is because I watch on social media, I watch on Twitter, young people coming into their own, developing an analysis, and speaking the truth about the kind of country that they want to live in. And they're willing to fight for it. That I think it's really easy to dismiss. So what people will frame as like social media activism. It is not to replace, putting feet in the streets. It is not to replace running for office, but this public square that we now have access to has taught me a lot, allows me to track conversations. And again, I think that Nigerian democracy was attacked and has gone through a vicious attack, but our women leaders and our young people and voices of the folks who have been excluded from leadership are the medicine that we need in this moment.
Thank you. Aisha, what would you say? Where are we? I think I can almost guess your response. Go ahead.
Well, yes, I like the simile or the metaphor that Nse used. So yes, we are in the hospital, but we will get better. The prognosis looks really, really good, especially when, as she says, we look at the young people who make up really the majority of our demographics. Many of them were born into democracies. They haven't lived through military rule like the rest of us have, so they're less fearful. Technology that they were born into and have used since they were babies or young adults allows them to navigate the world in a way that we weren't able to, our parents weren't able to. So with social media creating this virtual marketplace of ideas, even though yes, of course, the noise can seem really distracting, but between all that, you see an energy. And so, yeah, I think my prognosis is very hopeful. My hope in Nigeria generally lies in the fact that many of the things, we haven't done a lot, to be honest, in terms of building a viable democracy. We've really just been doing the same things over and over again. I mean, I tell you, pick up any description of the way we've run our elections, our political parties from the 60s, you would think we're talking about APC and PDP today. Word for word, it would describe exactly what we're seeing today. So when you think about it, 60 years of doing the same thing, surely there's a word for that. It's called madness. We're expecting any change. So for me, that's also where the hope lies, that we haven't actually done new things. There's room for innovation. There's room for young people. There's room for different ideas. There's even room for a rethinking, which is what we're seeing now. More young people post-NSAS are saying, you know what, let's go out there and vote. Let's go out there and run for office. INEC recently announced that, they were going to commence continuous voter registration. People immediately mobilized around civil society, different groups, political, religious, everybody's out there saying, please go out and register, get your PVC so that you're involved. And people are also understanding that, what, we can't just whine about the godfathers from morning till night. We have to beat them at their own game, which means we have to raise money ourselves for the candidates that we care about. And that was my experience in 2014, that when you're a candidate with credibility, people will come out for you. People will I raised more money than I thought would be possible within 6 weeks. I know real political veterans will say that's not money. 10 million naira is not money. But it was a lot of money for me as a political novice with no track record. Just only the fact that I'd been writing articles and people felt, okay, this is somebody whose views sort of match ours. So I think there's room for more ethical, value-based leadership in Nigeria, and the young people who, again, are in the majority, I keep stressing that, are going to help us lead and chart that path forward.
Thank you. Dr. Chichi. So Inse and Aisha are saying, it's in the hospital, it's getting better and it's going to get better. Some would actually say those of us who agree with them might be mad. Do you?
I don't think so. I think the analysis they've made of the state of the democracy, our democracy in Nigeria, for me is spot on. What I want to add, though, is that to the extent that democracy is supposed to directly affect governance and development, to the extent that it is, supposed to provide a level of sustainability and socioeconomic development and upward mobility for the people within the particular jurisdiction, that has not happened. In that regard, our democracy in Nigeria is, in the ICU, if I were to logically extend Nse's analogy, right? However, like Deval said, there's a level of optimism because we have these young people who are increasingly refusing to accept the status quo, who are increasingly refusing to accept these death sentence of poverty, right? And so to that extent, that our democracy will, substantively affect governance to the extent that it leads to democratic, to socioeconomic development. I would want to agree with them that, there is hope.
Okay, thank you. Now let's look at strategic learning. I'm going to take us across the, across the ocean, and we're going to talk the United States. So in the United States, after the 2020 elections, we saw a rash of state legislations allegedly aimed at restricting the ability of some demographics to vote. Now, Inse, we know you and your team and others like you are fighting that. So what we want to know, and what I want you to teach us, is what are some of the strategies that are being used to resist these sorts of, if you like, a boundary setting or pushback? And how can we use those rights to protect Nigeria and our votes?
Right. So I'll start by saying this. When I think about the sort of characteristics or the features of American governance and American leadership, it is very much, it's pale, male, stale, minority that has an outsized influence on our policy making and on the politics of the country. And what we're seeing now is that, in the marketplace of ideas, fewer and fewer people are buying what they're selling. And so the only way for them to continue to hold on to power is for them to cheat. It's for them to take a sledgehammer and break the machinery of our democracy and of our elections. And so I think that they are very, very afraid. I joke often particularly when I'm speaking to white Republicans and white conservatives, that the demographics are changing rapidly, and that this country is very much like speeding towards its multiracial, multi-ethnic, multilingual future. And you need not be afraid. What you need to be doing is leaning into this moment, because you can't fight the future. That white slavery won't be a thing, and you can calm down. But that message hasn't exactly penetrated yet. And so what we're seeing is a bunch of sort of anti-democratic attempts to suppress the vote, et cetera. And so some of the strategies that we are using to fight back and to win in this moment, big picture, I guess I'll just talk about like the containers that they're in, is litigation. And that while there are a lot of conservative judges that have been appointed over the past 4 years by the previous president and his administration, is that the judiciary is still a separate branch of government and is designed, on paper at least, to be a check on the power of the parliament, of Congress. And so we are often, seeking opportunities to challenge unjust laws in the courts. I think the second big bucket is communications, being strategic about how we communicate externally to young people about the opportunity, the moment, but more importantly, their role. We are very sort of consistent in our message that there's no Messiah, that there's no hero, that there's no Calvary coming, that it is up to us to build the communities, to build the cities, the states that we want to live in and that our families want to live in. And I think art and culture are also big picture sort of strategies that we use, that we are trying to change the culture of democratic participation. We're trying to change the culture of public life and what that looks like. And so why not use art and music and things that not only capture people's heads with our ideas, but capture people's hearts and attention with the creativity.
Okay, thank you. So what you're saying is communication. That's the strategy you're using to fight. Basically,
litigation,
teach, educate, sing it. Yeah.
Litigation, communications, and then cultural organizing, cultural strategies. And then I will also add just direct action. Again, feet in the streets. You will hear me reference it a lot of times, that there are times where we have to show our power, that there are times where we get elected officials who get to Parliament, who get to Abuja, who get to Washington, D.C., and forget that they've been sent there to do the people's work. And so reminding the people at all times that we have the power. We have the power to hire and fire, I think is also one of the big buckets.
Thank you. Thank you, Inse. Dr. Chichi, you're based in the United States, and I'd like to get your take on that. You need to unmute yourself. Right. Yeah, there you go.
Seeing as Nse is on this panel, I don't know if anybody wants to follow that in any shape, way, or form, right? So what I would simply say here is that giving our context in Nigeria, because part of why you have the level of success, right, in pushing back against these currents in America is, like Nse rightly said, is because of, citizen participation, right? Philanthropy funding, right? These organized pressure and lobby group and pressure groups, which we don't have in Nigeria per se, right? And so then the question you asked, how do we do this, right? How do we replicate some of these strategies? And that's part of what we need to start thinking about, right? How do we establish, or how do we borrow or transmit this democratic cultural change that Nse talks about? How do we do that here in Nigeria, right? How do we then accept that this is us, that the advocacy, we cannot be waiting for external groups to establish this kind of advocacy that's going to mount an effective resistance against, government's tendency to close up the space, right? Against government tendency to restrict electoral participation. So that's kind of part of what we'll be thinking about. How do we translate the American experience to the Nigerian context? How do we get philanthropists? How do we get big business to believe in Nigeria enough to invest? Right? How do we get the development, the international development allies, right, to believe in Nigeria enough to change their modus operandi of allyship in Nigeria, right? Such that their engagement is not only during electoral seasons, right, which is then too ad hoc, right, and we end up not achieving much, but to also engage in the long-term off-season cycle when institutions can be built outside of the craziness of elections, right? So we need to think about changing democratic culture in Nigeria, as Nse has rightly said. We need to change, we need to look for a way so that diffusion, right, will take place in Nigeria.
Thank you, Dr. Chichi. Aisha, well, given that you had, I'm putting you on the spot here, because one of the things that Dr. Chichi said is we need sort of lobby groups and philanthropies, et cetera, to invest and fund in order for us to do exactly the things that INSEE said they did, which is communication, litigation, et cetera, And of course, you run a sewer. I need to get your take on that.
I think the strategies are spot on, and we have actually adopted some of those in Nigeria already. And in picking up from where Chichi left off, for sure, many philanthropies are investing in exactly those areas: strategic litigation, strategic communication, social movement building, especially targeted at women and young people, understanding that they are really the future of our democracy, really trying to get them in. So I would say that absolutely. For example, I don't know how many people know, but the Nigerian Women's Trust Fund, I used to be CEO of the Nigerian Women's Trust Fund between 2012 and 2015, but they recently have filed a lawsuit in the courts, basically saying that Muhammad Buhari's administration has gone against the constitution in terms of its representation of women. So it's to force some sort of judicial review of what our constitutional provisions say or mean when they talk about equality of access and equality of opportunity. So that's one more recent case. There are many, many cases where we can find examples of Ford Foundation and Osiwa and other partners actually investing in strategic litigation to do with sexual gender-based violence. So those things are happening as well. But I'd like to spend just 2 minutes to talk about one thing that Nse said that I really appreciated, which is the power of the feet in the streets. My fear is that in Nigeria, in addition to being long commodified, our protests are commodified in a way that I didn't realize for a while. Like, it took me a while to understand that, people are actually paid to come out on the streets. And so it's become increasingly difficult to mobilize people for any reason. And this is something that happened from the military era. So we can hark back to Abacha's 1 million men march for Abacha and things like that. But that has become a culture, which speaks to, again, something else that Nse and Chichi spoke to, that we have a type of political culture where people want to be paid for everything. And it speaks to how people experience what it means to be in politics as the fastest route to immense wealth and power. And so in a way, citizens have begun to say, well, if you want power, because power will give you access to so much money, then pay us for our support upfront, which is what has commodified protests so much in Nigeria. Then the other part that's dangerous, especially within the last 2 years, is the criminalization of protest, as we can see, not only with shooting people on the streets, beating them up, setting thugs against them, as we saw in October 2020 during the EndSARS movement, but now there's a bill in the National Assembly set to criminalize protest. This is something that we must absolutely not allow, because it is tied to a healthy democracy. We should be able to, as Nse said, get on the streets every single day if we want, to remind those who are in office, not even just the politicians, because we spend far too much time on them, but also the civil servants and public servants to say, you work for us. When I spent a year in Berlin, every single day, I'm not joking, every day there was a protest. I mean, you'd like to think, what could people possibly be protesting about in Germany, for God's sake? We have no light, we have no water. We should be on the streets every single day. We should be sleeping on the streets. But there they are every single day, and no one's paying them for it. So I agree that we need, and this is where Nollywood, would come in. You know, we need our Nollywood, we need our musicians to pay a bit more attention. I know they've begun. I'm being very mindful that they're great partners to civil society, but we need more movies, more sitcoms, more.
But are they? Are we just being
Yeah, they're
generous?
trying. I know I'm trying to be generous so that, you know, maybe they'll be encouraged to do more. But we need them to start portraying to help us change the culture of politics and power in Nigeria. And they're a very powerful platform to do that, because young people, you know, follow them with so much dedication. And so they have very powerful platform to do that. And we are working in civil society to spend more time with the artists, with Nollywood, to start partnering with them. I mean, you talked about what's Osiwa doing. We supported a movie, I think it was called Fourth Republic, actually, where, you know, so we are beginning to work more closely with Nollywood. I keep saying Hollywood, working more closely with Nollywood to make sure that this culture you talk about, especially among young people, we start changing the relationship with power. We start making people see what their role is as citizens, a bit more aspirational, a bit more idealistic, less bread and butter, which is really what Nigerian politics is about. Are you still with us, Iriti? She's frozen. Oh, and we've lost her. We did prepare for this. So let's just continue the conversation. I mean, I'm not going to ask another question, but Inse, I'm actually curious. I've always thought that Hollywood really, really prepared, well, I guess for me, the rest of the world for an Obama type or a Hillary type presidency. Am I right or am I wrong? I mean, how much power and how much role has Hollywood played in preparing its citizens and people around the world for a more inclusive, representative type of democracy in the United States?
Yeah, I think they certainly have had a role, right? That it would be difficult to fight for something that your mind can't even conceive of. And so when we think about the power of narrative, and storytelling as an organizing tool, I think absolutely that there is a role that Hollywood has played in planting the seeds, and again, helping our mind's eyes conceive of what is possible, even though there's no evidence in the actual world that it's possible. I think about, you know, movies about space travel before Russia launched their first cosmonaut and the US launched its first astronaut. That, again, storytelling is a powerful and effective tool. I think that's one in terms of looking forward. I also think that Nollywood and it was Bollywood and Hollywood also have an important role as I talk about misinformation, but remembering the past and making sure that we tell the truth about the past. That there are so many anachronistic, ahistorical narratives that get floated out about how we got to this moment. And when I think about progressives and those of us who are building the countries and the world of the future, I think that one of our superpowers is memory, to not let the memory, again, of how we got to this moment be erased or be edited to serve an individual's ego or an individual's agenda. So one, creating space in the mind for what doesn't currently exist, but something that people want. And then two, making sure that we preserve the integrity of our memories and the past, so that one, if we do continue to repeat them, at least we fail better the next time.
I was just thinking, I completely agree with the idea of soft power, right? Nollywood, Hollywood, and all of that. But But I also would like to think that part of the reason soft power has been so effective in the United States is because there are existing institutions and structures that, then gives, strength, that then gives legitimacy, right, to soft power, which is where we're headed in Nigeria, is to, get these institutions, is to get these structures and systems working. I am not so sure they are, established right now. We have the trappings of them. And so if we don't have these established right now, what do we have, right? How can we, make sure that, how can we push back against these currents? And I think one thing perhaps that we might also bring in here is the fact that there are, certain structures that exist already that we just have to, mobilize and energize. And these are, what we will call women's movements, although, some people right now would say, no, we don't have women's movement in Nigeria, but I want to think that we do, right? We have all these, gender-based civil society advocacy groups. The only problem is that they are in pockets and they are in silos, right? And they are working individually, each of them kind of chasing after its own mandate. And I think part of this problem is because of the professionalization, like the NGOization of this civil society space, where you then have, instead of collaboration, what you have is competition, right? You have this, increasing tendency to specialize in a very tiny space and to stay there, right? And to monetize it and stay there. So perhaps what we need to do is to cross-mobilize across these groups and to create a coalition that can actually effectively mount pressure and lobby, politicians and lobby political parties, right? Because part of the, outside of litigation in the United States, part of the success is an underlying threat of, electoral punishment, perhaps, right? Which I think is where we need to get to in Nigeria, right? And how do we create these structures? One, I would want to suggest that part of what we have in existence already are pockets and, of gender-based civil society activism, women's movements, feminist organizations, traditional women's societies, just across board. How do we cross-mobilize, so that we get the numbers that can actually get political parties, listening, that can get, National Assembly members listening, that is able to mount effective pressure and lobby points?
You're on mute, Ireti, but welcome back. All we were talking about was expanding on soft power, so you can take over from where you were. So just to give you a sense, we were discussing soft power. Inse talked about Hollywood, Nollywood, and then Chichi was saying she agreed, but we didn't have the structures she thought that would sort of back up that soft power. So over to you.
Super, thank you. Apologies for that. Nigeria happens, and in Nigeria, we just get on with it. Right, Hai? We don't complain, we just get on with it.
Spot on.
That's what we do. Right, so my next question and my last question in the strategy section is, taking an aerial view of women's political participation and representation in Nigeria, what are some of the strategies that you think have worked elsewhere that we can be deployed or that can be deployed here? Now, I'm going to come to you, Dr. Chichi, for that.
Right. So if we are talking about, what's worked in other contexts, right?
Yeah.
What we will want to do is to look at the evidence. Right? And if we're looking at evidence across contexts, And I was in a discussion the other day with a colleague, and we were talking about, advanced industrial societies, advanced industrial democracies, and there seems to be a visceral reaction, right, when we talk about advanced industrial democracies, the Nordic countries, and the United States, in comparison to Nigeria. There seems to, for some reason, our people seem to think, well, the United States is 250, is centuries old democracies and all that. We cannot make those comparisons. I disagree, but however, for the purposes of looking at what's worked, let's look at what's worked in low and middle income countries, right? In developing, what we call developing, or the global South. One thing we know that works, or that has worked, is legal reforms, right? Legal reforms have worked. Constitutional amendments across Africa, right? Because there's a tendency for our people to say, well, we are Africans. Well, yes, across Africa, there's been a slew of constitutional amendments, right, that have changed the provisions of the law to make for equality between the sexes, right?
Yes, indeed.
And so if we're talking about legal reforms, then in this particular context, then we're looking at legislations, right? Legislations around property and inheritance laws, which we know is part of why women remain marginalized, because property and inheritance sets the space for economic development, right? For access to capital. And so it's talking about that. It's talking about, legislation around electoral systems, right? In our case, we need to start having the conversation about changing from a first past the post to a proportional representation system, which we know works better, right? And not only does it work better, it also works better for inclusion, right? Particularly for women's inclusion. And then in this regard, we're talking about this, particularly legislation around affirmative action, right? Gender quotas. Whether it be, the candidate quota, or whether it be reserved seats. So legal reform works. Another thing that works is transforming political institutions. And of course, when we talk about transformation of political institutions, we're essentially talking about the political party, because we know that the political party is the ground zero for women's political aspirations and candidacies, right? And so transforming political parties.
I'm gonna have to ask you to wrap it up, Dr. Chichi.
Right, okay. And so the main two
I hope I have no
strategies that I would want to say works, if we're taking an aerial view, that's worked in context across, both Africa and the global South in general, is legal reforms, particularly legislated affirmative action, as well as the transformation of political institutions, particularly political parties, democratization of political parties.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Inse, hi.
Hi.
I'm gonna, yes, I'm coming to you for that. And you heard some of the things that Chichi said. Quite a lot. It's quite broad. What can we narrow down in, given the limitations of the environments that we're in Nigeria?
I don't know if it should be narrowed. I think that,
okay.
We often talk about people staying in their lanes. And I think that Dr. Chichi made a very important point, that we can point to some parallels between the US context and the Nigerian political context in terms of civil society and the institutions that exist. But in a lot of ways, Nigeria is still really nascent. And so I think that, universities again, art and film and culture workers and cultural artifacts. And more people running for office. Like all of those things are required, and that people should. So I tell people that I subscribe to the gospel choir theory of organizing, or campaigns and elections. And that's the idea that you have altos and tenors and sopranos and an audience, right? And that everyone has a role to play, everyone has a note to hold. And that the reason that these gospel choirs can hold such powerful notes for such a really long time is that when an individual needs to drop out, right? Personal, professional obligations, or just to catch their breath, that the note continues, that the organizing continues, that the work continues. And that to me is a sign of a mature society, a mature democracy that can withstand even a charismatic, wannabe tyrant, that because there's infrastructure, that we protect our institutions, and that make up our society, that we will be able to withstand, again, the whims of any individual madman. And
Okay.
that those things are important.
Of course. Aisha, now, Chi has made suggestions. Insight doesn't think we need to narrow it down. How many of those can we implement in Nigeria? Okay, you can argue that we're doing some of them already, but really, can we?
Thank you. I mean, to be honest, I don't know where to start again because this is such a rich conversation. I get the sense you're going to tell me to shut up, but I want to start with what.
Never.
With what? No, I trust you, Ireti. You tell me to shut up when my time is up. But where I wanted to play devil's advocate, that I agree completely that more laws, fantastic. We need a stronger constitution, more meaningful electoral bills. I definitely agree, proportional representation. But sometimes it's not just the laws themselves within the context and the culture that will make the difference. And I remember thinking, I think Not Too Young to Run ran a wonderful campaign, and they've taken it, across the continent. But that was never going to change. That was never our problem. It wasn't a bill to reduce the age requirement that was going to move the needle. That's not really what's keeping young people out. It's the culture. So we had the law changed, but nothing really changed in terms of youth representation. Yes, more young people can technically run, but not more. We're not seeing more young people winning. Unlike in the United States, where we can count on Alexander Ocasio and XYZ and XYZ, we could see clearly that post 2016 Hillary Clinton run, there was definitely an increase in young people running, young women running, and more young women getting into office, state and nationwide. We didn't see the same thing after Not Too Young to Run. So I'm worried, and then we can also use the Kenyan example where with affirmative action, the Supreme Court decided to interpret it in a way that didn't actually give women the seats. So I'm wary of putting too much emphasis on laws. We spend a lot of time on laws in Nigeria. Meanwhile, our culture is what is wrong. And so we need to fix that. But I agree, laws play a role. So I think Sure.
I'm going to twist that a little bit so you can still say it within your time. So bills and reforms are not how we're going to fix Nigeria. Not that they don't work, but we know that they're not it, so to speak. You mentioned about culture. Let's just extend it a little bit. How do we go about changing that culture? What do we need to do in that culture?
And this is where I'm with Inse, that we need as many people as possibly entering into the political space, into the civic space. We need to expand the definition of civil society in our mind so that, as you say, it's not the NGOized world where it's people with a registered organization that are civil society. All citizens need to understand that they are part of civil society. Media is part of civil society. The church, the mosque, they're all part of civil society. And they all have a stake in trying to make sure that our politics and our democracy works for us. So I would say more people with enough eyes, all bugs are seen. This is something I learned in school, but it's a technical thing, but it just means more people, more transparency. Two heads are better than one, so to speak. So how do we change culture? We change culture just from art, from culture, from narratives, but it also changed from being intentional about what we want. If we say we want more women running, we need to ask more women to run, for example. So how many people have said to you, Ireti, you should run? How many people have said to you, Chichi, you should run? Or to Nse? We need to be we need to be deliberate, intentional about telling women, young girls, you can run, you should run, we want you to run, we'll support you when you run. And the reason why it's important to say that is we keep talking about 35%, but if you give me 2 minutes, when you run through the analysis that was done by, and I'm not sure if it wasn't even Chichi's study that I saw this, where you did analysis of the aspirants in the 2019 election, you'll find that in most cases, we didn't even have 15% of women, despite having 99 political parties. When you do an analysis of the aspirants, we didn't have 15% of women running for Senate, for House, for state, for governor. In some cases, it was even less than 1% of the aspirants were women. So that culture will only change when we are more deliberate and intentional about supporting women. So that's one simple way that we can do that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Can I just quickly?
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
So I completely agree with Aisha. In fact, the literature, if we look at the literature across what has worked, what Aisha has, just said, part of what has worked is promoting a conducive and gender progressive society, right? Creative, a conducive, building capacity of, people to run. But I don't want to run. I am not as brave as Aisha. The reason I do not want to run is because I know I am not competitive, right? So when we ask women to run, when they do the feasibility analysis, you want to be politically competitive, right? You don't want to, jump in, head first and then realize, that this is a Titanic, right? And so part of creating a conducive environment, part of political competitiveness, right, is with the establishment of laws on the book. And of course, we have a problem of capacity, implementation, and enforcement issues in Nigeria, not just in Nigeria, across Africa, right? However, we need to have these laws on the books, because then we have terms of engagement, right? For example, the attempt to legislate the gender quota, the 35% affirmative action. If we have that on the book, then it's a time to engage with the political parties. Then we can start, looking at at implementation. That is one. Secondly, right? If we do not, have these terms of engagement, we give, unlimited access for all sorts of behaviors that ends up mounting insurmountable barriers to women's political participation, right? So, for example,
I'm going to give you 1 minute to wrap up so we can move to section 2.
Right. The ongoing attempt to, to regulate campaign financing. If we get that in the books, then we create a pseudo, so to speak, level playing field, right? That even if a woman does not have, 1.5 billion, 1.5 million naira to, or is it, no, 5 billion naira to run for the presidency, which was what was in the book before they changed it to 15 billion and all sorts of, practices and all that. But at least we know that that what we're looking for based on the books is 5 billion. And, there's this, where there's the advocacy, there's the mobilization and all that. So yes, we need the books, we need the legal reforms, we need the political change in political institutions. If we do not fundamentally transform political parties, Aisha, I'm sure you know that, I mean, like, there's no place women cannot make any headway, right? We need to establish a particular percentage of, or some kind of parity, or parity, 35% women's leadership in political parties, because that helps a lot in changing the culture that we're talking about, right? So we need to have some of these changes and some of these reforms in the books, and then we can, that will extend the conversation of culture, because clearly.
I have to stop you, doctor.
Right.
Okay, finish that sentence. Finish that sentence. Yeah.
Laws feed into cultural change.
Excellent.
Right?
Thank you.
Laws feed into cultural change and normative changes. We cannot divorce those from laws.
Thank you so much. Right, we're moving on to the second part of this wonderful conversation. We're into reforms, and we've talked about reforms before, so let's kind of unpack them a little bit more. Question one, there's been a clamor for reform both at the constitutional level and in the electoral process. Do you think that as part of that reform, the recently introduced bill by Deputy Chief Whip Honorable Nkiruka Onyediocha, 11 additional special seats for women in the National Assembly is a viable proposition? And is it the way forward? I ask this question because in a National Assembly that has over 469 seats, is just under or over 30% enough allocation to women? Aisha, talk to me.
Wow, I feel as if this is Chichi's question because she's for laws, and I'm more of an anarchist.
Well played, Aisha. Well played.
No,
Aisha wants to go out and carry a banner.
Yeah, and that speaks to what Chichi said about knowing your nature, But I'll be honest, I would start with saying that when I first heard that, of course, my default setting was no, there's a problem here. But we've had, I have to say, within the women's movement in Nigeria, among civil society and politicians, robust conversations about this. And I've come somewhere in the middle. So I can see the benefits of this proposal. I can also see the dangers, which speak to what we just finished talking about. That, okay, the law is one thing. Let's have it. Maybe it will help us nudge the narrative, nudge the culture. There is something to be said about having that many women in the National Assembly all at once in a way that we've never had. So my fears for what the cost will be in a country where we're already complaining about the cost of governance, how expensive it is to maintain our legislators. Those fears aside, the other fear being, just again, back to our political parties and the way candidates are enthroned and selected, because we know that internal party democracy is quite low. So if that stays the same, the worry that the women who eventually make it into the National Assembly will be the typical type of women who do get in, who generally want to uphold the status quo, which is patriarchy, and will not in the end really do much for women. So those are my fears, those two things, the costs and the substance of having that number. But from the conversations and the debate, I see the value. I see that, yes, there's something to be said for having those numbers, 30% women, that will make a difference. The numbers will send subliminal messages to young people, not just women, but also men, about the place of women in lawmaking. And yeah, with engagement, we could see more progress. But so I'm somewhere in the middle about that.
Super. Insane.
I'll be quick.
Here's what I'm going to say to you. Why are we accepting 30% when we can have 55%? Why?
Agreed. They say you shoot for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll land amongst the stars. That if we intend to push and make this kind of constitutional intervention, that we shouldn't start by negotiating against ourselves, that we should at least start with what it is that we want. And so I applaud 30% and know that we should probably have started at 60 so that we can land at 50, right? Eventually. And here's the thing, and I will continue to say this, that when we think about reparations or the idea of repairing harm that has already occurred, that to communicate the 30% is fine when we think if we were starting with what tabla rasa, if we were starting with a blank slate to say this is what the Constitution should be going forward. But we're also trying to address the harm that has happened throughout the history of the Republic, and 30% isn't going to get us there. And so I think it's bold and ambitious demands because we still have to negotiate against conservative forces and people who are committed to the status quo.
Thank you. I totally agree. Chi-Chi, can you hear me? I hope I haven't frozen. So we know that if we ask for 35, the chances are they're going to say 15%. Ainsley says we should go for 60. What number are you settling on and why?
So I just want to, the politics of numbers have, always been problematic, right? Just let's, start with that. Having said that, I agree with Aisha that the perfect is the enemy of the good, right? And we also perhaps should take a little leaf, from, history, the Beijing conference that set us in this path, right? And we know that the 35% recommendation from the Beijing conference was clearly thought out. So now let's put that in context of the Nigerian situation. We are talking about a culture, right? That if it does not feel that, women should not even be in the room at all, it thinks that if you think that you're a woman and that you measure up to a man, then contest with a man as is, right? So what we're looking to do is to at least form a critical mass of women, right? To, as Aisha said, change the culture. Now, if we're waiting until we have 50% women in the room, we might be waiting for Godot, right? We know Godot never comes. So let's start with, actionable goals, right? Let's start with goals that we can achieve. And I believe that's what's
have I frozen again? Oh gosh, okay.
Can hear you.
That's what the 30% is.
Oh, good.
Okay,
good.
So absolutely, it's taking a long time. By the way, may I just say that the bill has not been passed, that the bill is still up against a whole lot of, hurdles.
Well, it's gone to the second reading. It's gone to the second reading.
Right.
It's past that.
Yeah, well, it's still up against, there's still, a mountain to climb, right? So if we get that, then, the issue of legitimacy, the issue of inclusion, right? What women are we talking about? The issue of, inclusion of cost, all that, I think are conversations that we can have later. But for now, let's get these women in the room.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Now, what political reforms can do the trick for women representations in Nigeria, considering the myriad of challenges that is peculiar to women? And in that sense, what do you think is unique about Nigeria's abysmal outcome in women's political representation? Aisha, am I picking on you? No, I'm not.
Well, no, not you are. What political reforms can do the trick? I feel like this is a question that we've sort of answered in a little bit. What is unique about Nigeria's abysmal outcome? Well, I'd rather focus on what could be the trick. We've talked about political reforms. We've talked about legal reforms, electoral reforms. We've talked about strategic litigation. We've also talked about communication. So I'm trying to think about what else we haven't talked about that might make the difference. And for me, it's maybe back to citizens awareness, mobilization, trying to make people understand the link between the level of development and the state of their lives and government. You know, there's something, and maybe this is where the uniqueness of Nigeria comes in. There's something about our spirit that is so resilient in a way that maybe makes us suckers for punishment. You know, like we never seem to get to the point where we're like enough. So I would think that there's a lot of time to spend creatively, innovatively, to make people see the link between their lives in any way, socially, social justice, economics, security, welfare, well-being, mental health, all those things, and government. Because right now, everybody's their own government. Everybody secures themselves. Everybody provides their own water, their own light, their own schools for their kids, their own healthcare. You know, we're our own mini local governments. We need to sort of start making the link and putting more pressure on government. I think that's one thing that we can do. And I think that's where maybe our uniqueness comes in. We're too resilient in a way that keeps us just going and going, when actually we should stop and say enough.
Right. So, Inse, at that junction, I'm going to say to you, at which point do women get bombastic and break all the rules like men have been doing and are still doing?
You said at which point? Now.
At which point?
Right now. Yesterday. I mean, again, I think that that is the only thing that is going to help us push up against centuries of tradition, is to be bold and aggressive and forceful in our advocacy for women and women's leadership. I think, again, we have example after example after example of women's leadership, effective leadership in a number of civil society and private and public context. And so, you know, we have to be honest that it is much more about power and access to resources, the thing that has kept women out of political leadership. And so in terms of, so that's my direct answer to your question is yesterday, bold, aggressive, forceful, unapologetic. Because again, there's nothing about gender that gives us information that we need about how effective a leader will be. And so the idea that Nigeria's never had a woman head of state has nothing to do with women's leadership and everything to do with the challenges of running, financing a campaign, the expense of getting your message out, and again, overcoming centuries old thinking about the role of women in public life. Which leads me to my second thing is, I don't know if this is a political reform or constitutional reform. Actually, in fact, it's not. But thinking about reducing the barriers to running for office that include, again, the extraordinary amount of money that one needs to raise. I mean, I don't think that anyone has reached the level of absurdity that the US elections have reached, but Nigeria is definitely moving in
We don't have your money.
Right, but it's moving in that direction, and that's problematic. And so thinking about, you know, back to social media, but also SMS text messaging, and just all of the ways that we can get a powerful message to penetrate and cut through noise, are things that I think that people should be considering these days. And because they are cheaper platforms, cheaper technologies than what candidates had access to in the past.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Dr. Chichi, earlier we're pretty much in favor of the 111, and it's saying my connection is unstable. I hope I get this question in before it goes down on me again. Now, here's my question to you. There has been a call, given the calls, seats to accommodate women, do you consider this a negative of the legislation, or part of what is being pushed is to create additional seats, not so much for women to share in the seats that currently exist? Are you saying, or are you in favor of that?
I want to pretend like I heard what you said, but I might be
Okay,
answering.
shall I start again?
Please.
Okay, all right. So, remember earlier on we spoke about the deputy chief whips, her bill in the House 411 Parliament, right? However, where she's planning to create that 100 is additional, not as part of what already exists. So effectively, it would be an extension. In fact, if I give you the figure, I think it's supposed to be 37 extra in Senate and 74 extra in the House of Reps, which effectively would make our legislation bigger than it ever was. Are you in favor of that, given that it's going to bring in more women?
I think that's the conversation we just had, and I think Aisha have just detailed her reservations about that, which also happens to be my reservation. But like we said, that the perfect is enemy of the good, right? And at this point, yes, it is the creation of additional seats. It's not, is not reserved seats that will cut down, or that will fundamentally change the composition, the gendered composition of the National Assembly. It's not going to do that, right? However, like we said, what it will do is that it will bring more women in, right? Instead of just having is it 6 out of 109 women, right?
We currently have 19 seats. Women currently hold 19 seats overall, 9 in Senate, I think 11 in the House of Reps.
11, right.
So 8 in Senate and 11 in the House of Reps.
Right. Again, the perfect is the enemy of the good. That is what we need to do at this. If that is what we have now, I think it will be counterproductive to walk away from that. Although, of course, the counter argument is that once we have this, right, then there's a tendency for people in the National Assembly to say, you have these women, so we've had enough. Just like typically you would hear people say you have Okonjo-Iweala, you have Amina Mohammed, what else do you want, right? There's a tendency for that to become the verse we keep hearing after this. However, I believe, like we said, that part of what this is going to do is that, perhaps not create a critical mass, because it does not fundamentally change the gendered composition, but it will lead to a change, perhaps in the culture. We have more women talking, right? We have more women speaking. I at this point, I think we should take what we have. We should try and get this bill passed.
Okay, Aisha, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah,
because let me just say, my worry is women have actually led the call to reduce the cost of the legislation in Nigeria, typically. So go ahead, Aisha.
Well, I just wanted to say, in terms of political reforms, I left something quite critical out, which is that I guess for the past, maybe 10 odd years, we've been talking about changing our constitution, and in its entirety, I guess. There are many people who are dissatisfied with the 1999 constitution. Every election cycle, every assembly that comes in, I think we're in the 9th assembly since the Fourth Republic began, we discuss changing our constitution, and we have all these discussions. But I definitely think that that's an opportunity as well that women might want to lead, in terms of, visioning the kind of structure we want, the kind of governance systems we want in Nigeria to take us to the future and the Nigeria of our dreams. I think that might be a great opportunity for women, because there's something about our structure now. I know people, and I am also one of those people who say changing the laws doesn't change everything overnight, but I do think that our constitution could be reviewed, revised in a way that would make governance less expensive, less attractive in the way that it is. Two, that would be more decentralized in terms of even our local governments having the powers. You often hear them say to women, don't start at the National Assembly, don't start at the Senate, why don't you go to the local government? But we forget that the local government are completely under the thumb of our governors. There are many states that have not had local government elections for years. And when they do have elections, the party of the governor wins 100% of the seats. If they're trying to be smart or clever by half, then they might win only 90% or 99%, but they generally win all the seats. And when the elections
I
don't
have to wrap you up. We're running out of time.
So political reform, constitutional reform is an area that women should actually be really much involved in, along with the youth. Between those two population sects, we should be the ones driving the conversation around changing our constitution, not Igboho and not the Ariwan Consultative Forum and not all these old men who have been in charge of Nigeria for the last 60 years.
Thank
Just
you.
30
Thanks,
seconds,
Aisha.
30 seconds. So this is to say that
I literally will have 30 seconds and I'm counting.
yes, this is to say that out for this ongoing constitutional amendment, you have only 13 women, right, in that committee, and that all the gendered proposals that were made, none of those were taken up. So it is an uphill battle.
Yes,
it is
sure
an uphill battle.
Look, I can assure you that I think this is almost a topic that we have to separate and perhaps do its own Zoom call for, but we do have to move on. And now I want to talk about the funding and the future. Insane. The question is, it is argued that a major deterrent to women's participation in politics is the high cost of our electoral system with a focus on godfatherism and high financial stakes. Do you agree this is the case? And if so, how can we best solve it?
I agree that that is a hurdle, a significant barrier that women candidates have to clear. I think that when I look at, and this is across the globe, across all contexts, that fundraising and a candidate's ability to raise money is one of the indicators to the outside world that you have a strong campaign. And I think that we need to immediately start thinking about, one, the training, recruitment, and deployment and support of women candidates, and two, thinking about small dollar donations and like how we support our own. You know, while you may not have access to millions or billions, that you can put small money here, and with a broad range of support, that we're not only, that I think the thing that we should consider as we move forward is not only organizing people to actually vote for you, but also organizing people to invest in our leadership, invest in their campaigns, so that they are invested in the outcomes. Because all of our research shows that if somebody will give money to the campaign, then they will definitely vote. And so thinking about that.
Okay, go on, finish your sentence.
That, and then again, and thinking about campaigning and leveraging SMS text messaging and a lot of the cheaper tactics that exist to get your message out, to do public and popular education, voter education, and mobilization around candidacy. So the hurdle exists, and technology, small dollar fundraising are two things that could help us clear them.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Chichi, now I've just heard Insay, and one of the things that sticks in my head from what she said is she called it small dollar. In Nigeria, we say small naira donations. Now, I've interviewed a handful of young female candidates, up and coming. Some of them are contesting for the next councillorship, which incidentally is in about 15 days or so, I think. Now, they will tell you that they are using that small dollar, small naira donations. That's actually how they're funding their campaign. So what do you think their chances are? What are the chances for this young and emerging female politicians who are going to be coming up now and leading to 2023?
Yes, well,
I mean, that's without big money. The small, listen, let's be frank. We live in Nigeria, right? Money speaks. The B word works. So we have to be honest with ourselves, given that small dollar might work in America because people tend to donate more, I find. But in Nigeria, small naira and the costs, inflation, etc., etc., is it going to work for these emerging new politicians, female politicians in particular?
Well, so in addition to the things that Nse spoke about, we'll also talk about, like I would say, legal reform. Let's add to that list the ongoing attempt to legislate, campaign funding, right? To regulate campaign funding. Because if somebody is able to spend, like they are proposing, 15 billion, what woman in Nigeria, right? At this point, even if we're all to collectively donate, I don't know how much we donate, for her, I guess another man somewhere is going to write the other guy another check of 15 billion. And then now we're looking at matching 30 billion, right? So there needs to be some form of regulation. Coming back to your question, looking at it from this perspective, right? The chances are, low, so to speak, right? Because, small naira can, although of course, small naira can go so far, but we know that one of the problems is that the network that these women have is not so expansive. Aisha was a bit more, I don't want to say lucky, I don't know what the word is, but that she had the platform that she had. She had, the track record she had of civil society organization, civil society mobilization, right? And of writing. And so she had her name out there. We're talking of women whose network is their immediate family, right? And friends. So the chances are not looking so good. The picture is not so pretty. However, we also know that one of the reasons we say we're optimistic is because these young women do kind of pack a punch of resilience, right? Skills, savviness, determination, right? And so even in places where it would seem as though they are not politically competitive, I would go as, I would suggest that with the help of organizations like YAGA, organizations like Women for Women, and a bevy of all these, partners in the field, that, perhaps we can start, we can start increasing their chances. And that is one more thing I want to say. I think that part of the fundamental problem we have as women, women's political participation in Nigeria is the absence of a cross-based mobilization that provides structures and mechanisms for grassroots mobilization, right? Because if we have this, then we stop this.
What do you mean by that? Let me just come in. What do you mean by that?
So YAGA, right, created a structure. And by the way, Aisha, I just slightly disagree just with one thing that you said so far, right? Is in saying that, YAGA hasn't worked so well. YAGA is just in its first cycle, right? And they have produced, the results that they have produced. And if they keep going like this, I want to believe that by the time they have, the fifth iteration or sixth iteration of YAGA, that there will be substantive disruption of the Old Boys Association in the National Assembly. That's my hope, right?
Dr. Chichi, I have to rush you. We're running out of time.
And I think I'll rest my case there.
Okay. All right. Now, we're going into the very last question of the funding. Audience, I would like to ask if any of you have any questions. We're going to open up the floor for 20 minutes for Q&A. Please be precise and concise with your questions. And if possible, do name the panelists that you want to answer or you're directing your question to, or if it's to all panelists. Prof, I'm presuming the young man is ready to be passing the questions to us. Now, so the last question in the funding and the future of, this debate, if you like, is how do you think Nigeria/Africa can better take advantage of the billion-dollar funds raised at the 26th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration? Remember, 25 years ago, that's where they came up with that 35%, with the objective to expanding the pipeline for more women participation in leadership. Aisha, talk to me.
Well, thanks, Iriti. I just want to say, Yaga is great. And so it wasn't Yaga, it was Not Too Young to Run. So those are two different things. Yaga ran the Not Too Young to Run bill. Full respect for Yaga, just hesitant. And as you say, yes, maybe in another 5-6 cycles, we'll see the results we want from Not Too Young to Run. And that will come because of legal reform, constitutional reform, electoral reform, and all the different things we talked about today. Now, back to the opportunity, the Generation Equality Fund, that forum, and the funds that were raised in Paris a couple of weeks ago. I think the opportunity is for formal civil society, obviously, but hopefully also for young people who are beginning to enter into the space. Young organizations, feminist organizations like FEMCO, who did well during NSARS. We were supposed to be joined by one of the co-founders of Elect Her. Elect Her is being put together by young women, and their target is for young women as well. So again, this type of fund would be useful for them to tap into, hopefully, if those funds are allowed, because my understanding of Elect Her is that they have a very specific goal to raise cash to put in the hands of women. Something really quite difficult because it's something that the model of Women's Trust Fund was built on. But what we found very quickly is that many people were skeptical to put funds in a general pool for women. And that's part of what my own experience running in 2014 taught me, that while I had struggled for 3 years to raise money for nameless, faceless women, just saying, hey, give me money into a fund because I want to support women, that didn't work. It took more of the Emily's List type of format, which is individualized. So you take a candidate, you say, again, Chiedu doesn't want to be used, but Chiedu is running, here's her background, fund her elections, then they'll be funding Chiedu, not just a blanket face. So I think that's an opportunity for Elect Her, FEMCO, many of the younger feminist organizations that are coming up to tap into that, not just to get the funds to support women, but also to do some of the advocacy, strategic litigation type work that's needed to change laws and to reform our political structures in Nigeria.
Thank you. Thanks, Aisha. Inse, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So lots of money was raised at Beijing, the recent 25th anniversary. How can we tap into that? Africa, Nigeria, how can we tap into it to actually use it, to elevate our women's movements, especially political participation?
Right. I think that I'm afraid that I might come off as like reductionist, or that this might come off as an oversimplification, but I think that we're already here, kind of. When you think about GoFundMes, right, that people are raising capital to finance films and other art creative projects, that this idea of ordinary people investing in something that they want to see make real, that we are moving to that place now, in, again, as it relates to entrepreneurship, launching of products, funding of campaigns, and that we just need to do more of it, that we need to continue to lean in.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm worried about time, so you still have 3 bonus questions, all of you, but we're going to go to the audience first. Dr. Chichi, tell me, what are your thoughts on how we tap into that funding?
Well, we don't have time, and I think I agree with everything that's been said. Right, transnationalism and internationalism, right, is expanding on these existing networks of the women's movements, and tapping into international and transnational networks that will then fund, because that's the channel for funding. We were essentially talking about funding, like Aisha has detailed, right? So I think it's transnationalism, internationalism, networking. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, audience, if you have any questions, please raise your hands, and I'll ask the engineer that is unmuting to unmute you. Sorry, where have you moved? Right, can you please unmute Paul? You've moved again, Paul. Yeah, Paul Ejime. Can you please unmute Paul Ejime? Can you please unmute Paul Ejime?
Yeah, I think she's done that. Good evening, everyone. Madam Chair and the wonderful women on this platform. I was going to say, sorry, I joined at 6. I hope I didn't miss much because I didn't see Aisha's invitation on time. But let me mention that your panel is a bit reverse gender, if we talk about gender balance and mainstreaming. One would expect to see a man talking too, because that is one area, madam, that I wanted us to look at. The fact that if we want men, because that is what it takes, who are those who are making these policies that are anti-women or have not carried women along, both in financing, both in participation, and you have not mentioned representation, because that is what you see in all the elections you have. Women constitute more than 50% of those who go out to campaign, to mobilize their fellow women across board to go and vote, and they vote for men. That is one area that needs interrogation. You have to look at why is it so? And then we go to finance. You mentioned finance. They have all mentioned transnational. You mentioned.
I need to rush you, sir. I need to rush you, sir. Sorry.
Okay, so
they can answer you.
How you can leverage Beijing is how many years? 25 years. It is possible, but even go into the internal, capital that is available. There is money in Nigeria. You can't tell me there is no money. That is why they are talking about 5 billion for to conduct campaign for presidency. And you think women cannot get it? You women have to use their power. You are powerful, but you are using just less than 30% of the power you have to get the men to rally around and give you the money you need to change the system.
Okay, before I let you go, sir, if I can just ask you 10 seconds, what is the power that you think women are not using, that they have that they're not using? Will this screen stop moving around? In just 10 seconds, please.
Okay, it goes beyond the pillow talk. It has to do with the fact that who are the men that we are talking about? Where do they retire to? They get back home. We have talked about the fact that in Nigeria, I've seen a president that decided had to move the capital of a state. That's my state, by the way, Delta State, from where they thought it would be to where the wife where the wife comes from. I'm talking about Delta, Asaba in Delta State. I'm also talking about engagement. Women we shouldn't belittle our women. Our women are intelligent. They stand on their own everywhere. Aisha is there, you are there. There is nothing that a man can do that a woman cannot do. So let us exploit that cerebrally, intellectually, and in raising funds. Thank you very
so much. Thank you. Can you please mute back Mr. Paul Ejima's line? Thank you. Right, who wants to take that question? Are you using your soft powers? Are we using our soft powers? Who wants to go first? Are we maximizing on it?
I'm just going to say that power concedes nothing without a demand, that you get what you organize for. And when I see, attended tons of political policy panels where they are talking about healthcare and education and the future of the country that are all male voices. And so again, power concedes nothing without a demand. That yes, men do need to be organized into doing the right thing, but it's in their self-interest. It is in our interest to make sure that half of the population is not excluded from leadership, that we deny ourselves the best that Nigeria has to offer when people are excluded based off of gender. And there's still way too many all-male panels. I'm totally fine with how today's panel was constructed.
If I may
Thank
just
you.
quickly say just something for
Chichi, yeah, I was just gonna come to you. You have 1 minute. I'm gonna give each one of you 1 minute to respond to every question, as many as we can. Go ahead.
I'll respond to this in 30 seconds. Perhaps for me, to wrap
Okay.
this up is to point to the brouhaha that resulted from the who belongs to the kitchen and who belongs to the bedroom, conversation that was had on a global scene by, the president, right? And so when the gentleman is talking about women using these superpowers to, transform the orientation of, men, I want us to know that we're talking about systems of power. We're talking about patriarchy. We're talking about systems and structures, right? We're not talking about, it's not conversations that has to do with sitting down, or this is not pillow talk. We're talking about power and systems and patriarchy. And I don't know if I want to ask the gentleman if he's willing to relinquish his position as the head of whatever he's heading to the woman that's coming, below him, because that is gender representation we're talking about. In a sense, what I'm saying is that men do not willingly relinquish power, no matter how soft you say it, no matter how many pillows you hold in your hands when you're saying it, right? Which is why we are here talking about, strategies, talking about, and the gentleman said engagement. That's what we're doing here, right? So, this idea of, telling women how to get out of men's oppression, of, trying to tell women how to do it and how not to do it and how well they are doing it. I think, perhaps we need to rethink some of those, right? And actually look at strategies where we might help. Let's start with us. What can you willingly give up in your own home, right? Let's just start with, helping to cook, helping to bathe the children. If it's not a woman's job, then perhaps, these are some of the conversations we start having. I think women are mobilizing as they should be mobilizing.
As an minor,
Looks like we've both, yeah, okay, yes, exactly.
As an minor, please, your question.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to ask with regards to pronouns used in the Constitution. We always get to see he, the president, blah, 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 he. I want to know if that actually make women to feel like they're excluded. Like if the pronoun like sort of just excludes women from wanting to participate in politics directly or indirectly. And the question is to all panelists, please.
I think that there's power in language. And there are a number of sort of conventions and assumptions that need to be challenged. The content of the Constitution doesn't change if all of the he pronouns are changed to she. And so it is, when you're talking about a cultural shift, it is everything, the framing, the way that we think about things, and including language. I mean, we are still thinking and organizing against, as Dr. Chichi said, systems. So it's not just one good person, like one good human that's going to come in and save us all and drag the country towards the future. That we need to think about all of the ways in which our sexism shows up and patriarchy shows up in life, Nigerian life, including language.
Thank you.
Ndidi Nwaneri, please ask your question. Ndidi.
This question is directed at all the panelists. Now I'm talking from the perspective of Nigeria. My question is this: when it comes to politics in Nigeria, the way it works, if we're going to be realistic, is that the reason why they raise so much money is because the system works in a way that the politicians actually pay the voters, right? So the psychology is that, well, you're going to give me money so that I vote for you. It's a big challenge in our political landscape. Having said that, now we're thinking of mobilizing women. Now, a lot of the women are not middle class. A lot of them are low income. The way the challenge plays out is that, well, we say, oh, they give them a cup of rice and they vote. They give them a tin of milk and they vote. They give them a cup of rice and they vote. They give them a tin of milk and they vote. Now, my question is, what measures have been put in place to reverse this, particularly not at our level, but particularly at the level of very low income women? Because if we want a large mass, we need to start thinking about everybody. So what are the ideas of the panelists with regards to changing this dynamic? Also considering the fact that poverty just not is. Poverty is something that influences the way you think about life, the calculations you make. So what are the strategies we can adopt to change this dynamic in the face of abject, sometimes absolute poverty?
Okay, may I? I mean, this is a very complex question that could take another entire 2 hours to answer, but I'll just try and summarize in a few things. One, I was shocked to my core to see in a book that there was once upon a time when people used to buy votes and sell votes in the US for the cost of a sandwich. So it speaks, for the cost of a sandwich. So we talk about a cup of rice, talk about milk. It used to be done in the US. And that's just one example. I'm sure there are many countries. The point is, there's a certain level within which our democracy is. There's a certain level in terms of the awareness, education, comfort, economy, and that's why some people argue that we're not ready for democracy. So I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying it's part and parcel of what the journey that we're in to make our democracy stronger. Personally, I say that I want to spend as little time as possible spending time trying to get poor people, impoverished people, not poor people deliberately impoverished by the state from selling their vote is a waste of time because it's logical for them to sell their votes. What we should be doing is making it harder for what we should be doing is, one, trying to get more of the people who will not sell their votes to come out to vote. If we are constructive and leave alone the people, if we had data, one, so that we're not relying on myths and opinions about what really drives our elections in Nigeria. If we had the data, I would argue how many people at the bottom of the pyramid are the ones who vote. But there's a narrative that says that middle-class people like all of us who are on this Zoom call today don't vote. Then the challenge would be, why don't we get more of us to come out to vote? Because obviously I won't sell my vote, or at least the cost of selling my vote will be a lot much higher than the average politician can afford. So if we look at the numbers, we'll see that our voter apathy is increasing. So let's focus our energies in the next election cycles in getting more of us who won't sell our votes to come out to vote. To do that will mean we need to make elections a lot more secure. And another thing we should be spending our energy on, instead of chasing the women who want to sell their votes for a cup of rice, as I said, is practical, is to focus on making the election process a lot more transparent. We don't know what happens with the collation of votes. That's the truth. Here's my myth, or my, what's that thing called, conspiracy theory. This whole thing of buying votes is to make the rest of us think that that's how elections are won. Elections are actually won inside INEC's back office in the collation rooms that we don't know about. But there's this charade of selling and buying votes to make us think that the votes have gone to the highest bidder on the streets. The votes are actually what's happening behind closed doors that we cannot see. That's where we should
Aisha, I have to ask you to wrap up.
Thank you.
Time. Thank you.
Kolawole
Dr.
Omoch,
Chichi, no, sorry, Prof. Dr. Chichi, did you have anything to add to that at all?
Right, yes. 30 seconds.
Very quickly.
30 seconds, yes.
Yeah.
And so I absolutely agree with Aisha to the issue of the mago-mago with collation. I think that's part of why we have this attempt to legislate electronic transfer, right, of votes that a lot of people are fighting. That's one. Secondly, in addition to all Aisha have said, what we also need to do is to, because civic participation, civic awareness raises a level of, it's education where we get people to vote their interests, right? In addition, poverty is what poverty does, but we can also get people to accept, the inducements, the electoral inducements, and still vote their interests. And part of the way of doing this is through grassroots mobilization. And part of the way to get to this kind of grassroots mobilization is through the—
You said 30 seconds.
Is through the building of coalitions. Okay.
All right. Okay, next question. I think Prof was about to say Kola Odutola, is that correct?
Okay, any of them? Kolawole Omoch or Kola Odutola, any of you? Please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yes.
They have to be unmuted.
They have to unmute themselves. Can you? Yes.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. And the question I would like to ask is, yes, we've talked about the division between the elite and the grassroots women. Is it at any time possible for a group of women or a coalition of women to start influencing the leadership of a Market Women's Association, to start influencing the grassroots group, the Tailors Association? And because somebody said to me that you can always see the future in the present, and that if the reactionary forces are the ones in charge of this grassroots group, and there's nothing we're doing, it means that wholesale, and I've been told that these market women have so much power, and the Tailors Association, they have so much power. Is there any possibility of influencing these other ancillary positions and status of power? That is my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I?
Thank you so much.
Very briefly.
Please go ahead.
And so this is precisely the idea of cross-based coalition building and cross-based mobilization. We have all these bigger associations, bigger women's organizations and bigger women's associations. It's a list of them. Elect Her, he for she, that deals with male allies, Women for Women, CDD even, right? Plan, Plaque, all of them, right? So what we are advocating is that they stop working in silos, and that they, start rethinking this competition and perhaps start re-engaging on more of a collaboration. Because once they do this, then we can be talking, we have a national women's agenda. We have an agenda to talk about. And then we can start diffusing, we can start mobilizing across these market women's association, right? Form one, Catholic Women's Organization, Tailoring Association, and all these organizations. The only way to get to them, or the easiest way to get to them, and to form these strong grassroots mobilization is through breaking the echo chamber at the elite level, right? Coming to an agreement of what it is we're looking for or we're looking to achieve, and then making sure that this gets to grassroots. And typically, historically,
I need to rush you to wrap it up.
Rennie.
I want to try and fit in more questions.
Right.
Rennie,
the problem
please.
has been with divisions.
Sorry, Prof. Let her finish her sentence.
With the divisions among women, right?
Please.
Anytime we talk about women's mobilization, what comes up is that women never agree. Fine, women have multiple interests, but we can organize around particular interests. For example, women's political participation.
No more examples, Dr. Chichi. I wanted you to wrap it up. Right,
Rennie.
Prof, you were going to call Rennie.
Please, Rennie.
Rennie. Yeah, go ahead.
Unmute yourself, Rennie. Unmute yourself. Rennie, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes, please.
Can you hear
Yes,
me,
you are.
everybody?
We can hear you.
Good
Yes,
day,
we
good
can.
day.
You have
Nice,
30
nice.
seconds, please, to deliver your questions because of time.
Okay, my question is this, or my questions, one question is this. Can somebody inform me whether the gender equality clause in the 79 Constitution is still in the 99 Constitution? That's number one. Number two, I heard a lot of suggestions about strategies, even with the literature people, movies and so on. What about also adding the media people? We used to be, I used to be a member of the Media Women's Association, and in Kwara State, we started a newsletter which contained information from as many women's organizations as possible, as feasible. It's not about women being divided, it's about sharing ideas. And it's not about the elite having the correct view or somebody else having the correct view. It is about being able to accommodate everybody's view and from that synthesize a national view. Also, I'd like to hear about your views about pan-Nigerianism. I haven't heard much about that.
Rennie,
all right, thank you so much. Aisha, I'm going to come, hold on. I'm going to come to you for the legal question regarding the Constitution. Do you want to take that quickly?
No, I'm not aware that we had a gender equality clause, but I do know that there's a gender.
There was
anti-gender discrimination clause in the 1999 Constitution. I don't know if that's the one Rennie is talking about. It basically says all genders must be treated equal and have equal access, which is actually the provision that people like the Speaker of the House, Femi Gbajabiamila, use to fight affirmative action, because they claim that affirmative action will be discriminatory against men if we had anything like that. So I'm not sure if that's what Rennie was talking about, but that's what we have in the 1999 Constitution, no discrimination based on gender.
Okay, so it's still there. Okay.
Okay, excellent. And I think Rennie, you have another question.
It was about
Rennie?
the media.
Yes.
The media.
What was the specific question? What was the
media women?
Question?
How can you use media women in the media, or even have a woman's magazine nationwide to first of all collect the views of the different women's organizations, so you even know where everybody stands?
Okay, all right. Who wants to take that question very quickly? Anyone? Dr. Chichi, you have a communications background. I could take it, but it's not. It's for me to ask.
Right. So I don't know, because as we've been saying so far, right, our communication has come a long way, right? There is a need, and that is ongoing. In fact, I'm working with one of those media organizations, you know, to do gendered awareness training for members of the mass media in the way they cover women in elections and all that. But what I don't know is if we have a need to go back, right, to the form of organization where we're collecting views, because it's out in the open. We have all these platforms now for interest aggregation, for, you know, this level of communication. So absolutely, Renee, you're right, that there's a need to continue to advance, you know, a gendered mode of communication and political communication, particularly for women in politics, for women's representation. But what I don't know is if giving the dispensation of—
Wrap up your sentence, please.
Given this dispensation, whether we need to go back to collecting, you know, this kind of mobilization.
Thank you,
Thank
Professor.
you. Thank you so much.
Professor
Pardon?
Alice.
Well, so we need to be careful here, Prof. So we have Abiola Akinyode Segun Olude in Canada.
No,
Peter
sorry, my
Ginger.
third question was Pan-Africanism, Pan-Nigerianism. I haven't heard any discussion about the current conflicts going on within Nigeria and how the women's role in it.
Right, okay. Inse, would you like to take that, please? Very quickly, 30 seconds. Thank you, Renee. Would you like to go back on mute?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Inse.
I think that
What are your thoughts on what women can do with regards to these pan-Nigerianism issues that are going on?
I think that there is a growing shift and move away from tribalism in all areas of life. I think that, you know, we are talking about 250 plus languages and ethnic groups, and that it takes time to solidify an identity. The idea, you know, when people get married or partnered, it takes some time to become one. And so we are living through Pan-Nigerianism every day. Again, you know, there's pride in one's tribe. I'm a proud BBO woman. People know this about me. It is a part of my identity, and it does not stop me or prevent me in any way from building. But the idea that there's a universal Nigerian sort of way of being or way of life or way of thinking, as I don't know if there's any evidence to support that. And again, B, we're talking about, you know, 50, 60 years of like formal, like a Nigerian constitution, et cetera. And I think that those things take time, but that is a feature, I think, of there's a growing base.
I need you to wrap up.
There's a growing base of support for that. And I think that we'll continue to see that thinking, that ideology, that one Nigeria approach grow as we move into our collective future.
Superb, excellent. Prof, there's a name there, Abiola Akinyode.
Okay,
Abiola, are you there?
Akinyode.
Yes. Abiola, are you there? Can you
Yes,
unmute
I am there. Thank you very much. I've been looking to talk. Sorry, I won't be able to use my camera, but I'd like to make some comments quickly. First and foremost, I think it's also important to be clear about whether, because I didn't hear people talking about women-led organization. I've heard you talked about Yaga and all of that. And to me, to a large extent, that also shows that we need more information about what women do. And I'm sorry that Chichi doesn't have those information. There's a lot going on with women-led organizations, organizing around women political participation in Nigeria. And it's unfortunate that for this kind of discussion, we're not hearing much about that is being done by women, as if we're starting all over again. All the strategies that have been raised here, they are strategies that have been tried and tested. You need to understand that we are dealing with a very superstructure. Nigeria might not sound like America. We have a different context with which we are working, and women are working within that context to try as much as possible to change. So if we don't see the result of the change, it doesn't mean that work are not going on. It doesn't mean that people are not working in communities. It doesn't mean that women are not working in grassroots. It doesn't mean that women are not working with people at different levels. And so I have two quick questions based on that. The first one is I'm asking Aisha, because Aisha has been there before, she's gone into politics and she knows what it is. So the first question is, do you think it's all about money? Can money really, if women have the money that they need to run for election, is that going to solve the problem? Because I know, Aisha, you won't agree that that's going to solve the problem. So we can raise all the money in this world and we still don't get it.
I need you to wrap up, Biola.
Yes.
Next
yes,
one.
that's
Your
one. But the second issue is to Chichi. The second question is to Chichi about political effectiveness. What do you really understand about political effectiveness that can really address the problem of Nigeria? I will stop here. Thank you very much, Irete.
Thank you. Right, Aisha, do you want to go first? You have a minute, and then Chichi, I'm going to come to you, and you have a minute. Right, it's 7:13, so Aisha, go.
Sure. Viola, we have mentioned women-led organizations. We talked about the Women's Trust Fund and the strategic litigation that they're involved in. We've talked about Elect Her. We've talked about Nigerian Women's, mentioned that. We've talked about FEMCO and what they did around NSAS. So we have been mentioning women-led organizations and women mobilizing for the last 2 hours in different aspects. Now, in terms of your question, yeah, I agree. Money alone will not do it. And I think this conversation today has actually done a good job of showing the depth of what needs to be done beyond raising money. We've discussed the different ways of raising money for women, women's political organizing, women's campaigns. But we've also talked about the fact that we need a lot more. We need to change the culture. We need to tackle patriarchy. We need to use other tools like strategic communication, strategic litigation. We've talked about political reform. We've talked about legal reforms. We've discussed additional seats for women. We've talked about changing the electoral system from first past the post to proportional representation. All those things, including mobilizing more effectively, more feet on the street, more use of media strategically, all those things will make the difference, including making sure that we can change the culture around what it means to be in power in Nigeria.
Because ultimately, 7:15.
The reason why
wrap up.
The reason why politics is so contentious and lucrative in Nigeria is because people get so much money from being in government. That also needs to change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chichi, Biola had a question for you too. You have 1 minute, please.
Okay, so I'm sure Aisha addressed the fact that we have been talking about women-led organizations here, right? The fact that we're not mentioning the 100 Women Lobby Group, we're not mentioning the Women in Politics Forum, you know, the New Stage Coalition Women, League of Women Voters, you know, all of them, we've been talking about them. What we're simply saying is that there is a tendency for, you know, for some of these organizations to work in silos. What we're saying is that we would want to see a more broad-based cross-mobilization and cross-coalition that then gets translated to grassroots mobilization. I think that's what we've been saying. That's what I've been saying all this while. And I don't want to assume to understand your second question about political effectiveness, but you know, political effectiveness is all about, you know, citizens' belief in the system working, right? But I don't know what your particular question is about that, so I'm not going to, assume to be all-knowing here and start answering a question that I don't really understand. I'm sorry.
Okay, Prof, at this point, there are 3 more questions that we need to cover, and I'm going to come back to them. Can somebody take the notes? The name is Segun Olude Canada, Peter Jenga, and Olajumoke Jacob Haliso. Before we do that, I'm going to drop in, just to flip things around a little bit, I'm going to drop in one of my bonus questions, right? And each one of you panelists have 1 minute to answer. 1 minute. You have to be really strict with yourselves. I can see that look in your eye, all of you, in fact, Seth, right? So my first of the bonus questions is, I call it the Rwandan question. It's the question that we have in Africa. Do we need a benevolent dictator or democracy as we have it now? Insane. You first. 1 minute, it's exactly 1918. So I'm going to stop you at 1919 with a few seconds over. Go.
I'll be quicker than that. I trust the people always. That a benevolent dictator might be good for a time, but we are not immortal. They will die. And what is left? I trust a system that will always center the needs and the priorities of the people. Always.
Thank you. Chichi, do we need, is Kigame what we need in Africa and in Nigeria indeed?
Any day, anytime. I think we're past the strong man. What part of the problem we're having, we continue to have if we don't break this mode is with, strong men. We don't want strong men. We want strong institutions.
Okay, thank you. Aisha, don't we need one? Yeah. Don't we need? Some have argued that in Nigeria, we need somebody to kick us in shape, right? And some will say to you, that's what Kagame is doing in Rwanda. No? Yes? Maybe?
Nope. Nope. There's no maybe about it. Nope. We don't need stronger men. We need stronger institutions. We need freer people. We actually haven't practiced democracy properly in Nigeria, so we can't even say we're tired of it yet. We can't say it doesn't work because we actually haven't been practicing it fully. We're still struggling to do that. And once we can, we'll all appreciate that there's no substitute for empowered, strong citizens and strong institutions that protect them. That's it.
Excellent.
So more democracy, not
right.
less.
Okay, before I go to my next question, I'm now going to come back to the audience. The lady Olajumoke has dropped her hand. I would love to see your hand back up, please, because you three, I'm going to make sure I fit in your questions if it's the last thing I do. Right, let's go to Shegun Olude in Canada. Shegun, are you there? Can you unmute?
Thank
yes.
you. I was
sorry
just
to have
unmuted.
kept you waiting. So sorry.
That's fine. My questions have been reduced to comments. One of them being, I work alongside with my wife in an NGO that we started. And when she says go, we go. There's no need for pillow conversation for us to go. And if men do not need pillow conversations, why do women need it? So that's one comment. We'll put that aside. So the next comment. I've listened to all the conversations. I've been really blessed to hear all what's been said today. At the time I came to Canada, we were at the cusp of pushing the envelope with women issues. And we had subjects like home economics at the university, and they were slowly retired for women's studies programs. And from then on, you had women in film, women in politics, conversations like that started happening. We have not talked about the role of the universities in Nigeria in this change, whether they're changing to meet what society needs. I know this may be a comment, it may be a question, but I haven't seen anything about what the universities in Nigeria are doing with their power, where students once had a very strong voice and they were trained to speak.
I have to wrap you up there. Yeah.
I'll stop there, but you understand.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to take that question? What roles are university playing? And are we talking to the universities? Are we connecting with them? No?
Well, I guess
in that
it depends
case,
on who you ask.
Aisha, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a very valid point. And are we connecting with them? It depends on who you ask. I know that a lot of people are beginning to engage students, understanding that students' bodies are a ripe place to go to mobilize outside the traditional ways of mobilizing. We've talked about market women. In a way, the market women are not we're not going to ignore them, but they've been sort of captured and they're the typical. My sense of what we need to do in Nigeria to move things forward is to start changing the game, not trying to match the game of the people who've been in politics for 60 years. So many people are going to the universities, talking to young people, and it's fantastic. It's a great experience. Now, speaking to the intellectual part of trying to promote women's political participation, I think that's what people like Jumoke Haliso of the, I'm not sure if it's Covenant University or whatever, are trying to do. There are a few universities that have the units who are investing in that. So there are conversations beginning to happen, but you know, we need a more holistic review of our national curriculum. As you know, we've talked about history being removed from it. We need to actually look at what's being taught in many of our universities. And you're right, that's an opportunity for us to engage in.
Excellent, thank you. I'm gonna go straight over to Peter Jenga. No, yeah, Peter Jenga, are you there? Peter? There you are.
Yes, I'm here, I'm here. Yes, are you hearing me?
Go ahead with your question.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Here we are.
Okay, thank you very much, all the contributions. My question is about the trending conversation that is really mounting power and popularity in the recent times in Africa. Recovery of African indigenous knowledge and resources and wisdom. Recently, we had a conference in Nigeria at Babcock University centered on Yoruba culture, and many presentations depicted the fact that African indigenous wisdom has the capacity to address many of Africa's issues, especially the one of women empowerment and participation. And so I want to ask this question. While we are groping for the empowerment of women and active participation in determining events across Africa and Nigeria, do we think that going back to our indigenous wisdom would give us a good pathway towards what we are searching for? This is because when we look at pre-colonial history, women were very participatory. Many fought successfully against, very significantly against colonialists. And many women established kingdoms and led kingdoms. Do we think about those histories so that women will have the confidence? Number two, what if there was patriarchy at that time? However, if we talk about patriarchy today, wasn't there patriarchy at that time? And if there was, why is it that women rose and led and fought and established systems that were favorable to Africa? Why are we not going back to such a wisdom? So as the conversations go on, especially even the university, the question again is, how useful is our African indigenous wisdom in what we are fighting for?
Very useful.
Right, so we know that colonialism fundamentally transformed the system, right? That's what it did. And so I hope perhaps, the idea is not to go back to the pre-colonial systems, because Nkrumah and Nyerere and, the ideas of socialism and how, whether socialism is African or is not African, whether the African system has transformed because of colonialism beyond, the point where socialism can be considered. We've had all that debate, right? That is to say that what we have now are institutions of the state that are considered modern, in quotes, right? And these are bureaucratic institutions. And so the idea that, the pre-colonial ideas of, what a woman is or is not can intervene in these systems now, might be a little too presumptuous. That's one. Two, women are here, right? Women have been here all this while. And so women are doing what women have always done. Like we said at the beginning, are men listening? Who is listening, right? So the African indigenous knowledge production, we know is superior. We know it works, but we also know that we have to apply it in places where we can measure its effect, where we can quantify it, right? We are talking about women's political participation. What precisely, right? In what way are you looking to apply African indigenous knowledge to changing the systems and structures that prevent women from political participation? Right, so I think these are some of the conversations that we will continue to have.
I will just add like plus one to everything that Dr. Chichi said. And also that we are capable of identifying an external threat in the form of settlers and colonialists, or British Petroleum, whomever, or the Chinese government, that it is possible to band together to protect ourselves, protect our families and our country against an external threat, and still want to challenge the additional ways in which Nigeria is denying herself the benefit of effective leadership, because half of its population is foreclosed from leading in a very public way. That both of those things can be true, and both of those things need to be addressed. Then I would just finally add that nothing focuses the mind like the credible threat of death. And so, you know, in Akwa Ibom, there are statues of women with machetes who stood toe-to-toe and face-to-face with European colonizers, and also that there's never been a woman governor. So both of those things can be true.
Okay, thank you. We've got one more question, one last audience question. But before I go to that, and I'm conscious of time and we have to be really quick. Again, you all get 1 minute each. So fastest fingers, as they say. Right. At which point should women, no, I think you've answered that. Actually, here it is. Where does foreign influence end and domestic responsibility begin?
Can you repeat the question?
Does anyone want to take that? Can you hear me? Right. Where does foreign influence, culture, as you said, Aisha, earlier, where does it end? And where does our domestic responsibility begin in terms of changing our future, changing our society, elevating women?
So I think this is part of what the conversation, you know, the debate, well, we're past that now, right? Is this idea that women's mobilization in Nigeria is externally imposed. That is far from the truth, right? This mobilization, this idea of mobilization, activism is fundamentally African, fundamentally women, African women, right? So of course, we have external allies and partners, but the struggle is 100% domestic. It's 100%, you know, internally driven. We take help, we accept help, giving, of course, all that is, you know, applies. That's one. Two, I wanted to just quickly mention that this idea of romanticizing the olden days, we kind of need to also, you know, be a little careful. Like the gentleman said, right? Wasn't there patriarchy then? Absolutely, there was patriarchy then. And that was why, you know, although we talk about women having some of these roles in the pre-colonial society, we know that women still, you know, the women's role and status in the pre-colonial society was never equal to man, to the man's role, right? So it's just, let's, you know, when we talk about the olden days and women's, you know, role in pre-colonial society, I think at times we overstate that, which is why we're all here, you know, fighting for real equality, right?
Absolutely. Aisha?
Yeah, thanks. I think women's mobilization is doing really well in Nigeria right now. Not only is it cross, and I think it speaks to Renee's question, I didn't get a chance to answer, but it is pan-African, it is pan-ethnic, it is across civil society, it is across wider civil society, including media. And it's been fostered a great deal by the ability to organize virtually. You know, before the pandemic and now even more so within the pandemic, many of us know that there are lots of things that we can do that before we would be looking to meet physically. That has lifted a burden. So because of the ability to mobilize on platforms like WhatsApp and other social media platforms, women are mobilizing and across intergenerations as well. So for me, there's a healthy understanding that nobody's going to save us. More and more increasingly, we're finding ourselves looking internally, not only to the past for solutions or to romanticize the past, but just as a way of learning from past women movements, whether it's the ABBA women's movement, whether it's what Funmilayo Ransome-Kuti did or Gambo Sawaba. We have a rich history of women being involved in political mobilization, and many of the women in civil society today and civil society activists are using those lessons, building on them and taking them forward. I think NSAS provided a great opportunity for the old, the young, for the old and the young to come together and compare notes. Many people were put off by the sense that maybe young people think that what they were doing in October was the first time Nigeria had seen some sort of mobilizing. So there is an opportunity though for more intergenerational conversations and learning experiences about movement building and organizing.
Thank you. Inse, 1 minute is 1934. So what I said was, where does foreign influence end and domestic responsibility begin? Of course, one of which is the women's movement, one of which is our society in general, one of which is our culture, one of which is our body politics. Where?
I'm going to reject the question. Because I think that oftentimes when we are pushing for change, that one of the ways that folks try to discredit the leadership and the revolutionary impact that these organizers have is to label them as outsiders, or to label them as if they are operating under outsized influence, or if they are what agents provocateurs. And so I think that as the world gets smaller, as there's a recognition that borders are man-made and therefore fungible, that the Constitution is not handed down by God, that it is something that people work on, and that it should be a living, breathing document that is a reflection of the times, but also communicating some basic principles that, foreign influence.
So you've answered the question though.
Yeah, does it mean you're
rather
reading,
than reject it?
Are there feminists like women serving in parliament in Tanzania, for example, that has a female president, right? Like, is that foreign influence as well, right? So I reject the false dichotomy.
Excellent, thank you. Right, I'm going to come to the last question from the audience. Chukwu, I am so grateful for you for your patience. Are you there? Can you unmute yourself, please? After Chukwu, then wait, I'm going to wrap up and we will close. Chukwu, are you still there? You need to unmute yourself. Yes, you're yet to unmute. There you are.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. What a wonderful panel. This is Gloria Chukwu from USA.
Thank you.
I have 3 questions.
You have 1 minute.
Yes, I have 3 questions. The first question is the role of the courts and law enforcement agents in strengthening democratic institutions and electoral process in Nigeria, and also enabling women, because one of the problems that hinder Nigerian women from participating in politics is political violence. Number 2 question is, I'm just curious about the role of female federal legislators, whether any of you have interviewed them to see what kind of lobbying tactics that they deploy, because women cannot move forward politically without getting the support of men. I believe wholeheartedly in that, and history has demonstrated that too. The third question has to do with education, particularly civic education. If any of you or all of you can share something about the current civic education or civic engagement that Nigerians have been exposed to, because I believe that religious institutions and other organizations, traditional institutions have an important role to play. I don't believe in what Aisha said, that there's no need wasting time to get the poor who are likely going to be bought over from convincing them to vote for somebody or for a candidate that may not have the resources. That is
Ms.
a bad.
Chuku, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, please.
That is a bad premises. We have to get everybody involved. So what kind of civic education are you advocating for Nigerians? Thank you.
Okay, right. So you've asked 3 questions. I'm going to, who wants to take which question first? Aisha, since you were the last.
Anybody can take.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chuku. Please go back on mute. Aisha, since your name was mentioned last, I'm going to come to you first.
Sure. I mean, what type of civic education are we involved in? It stretches between closer to elections, is all tied to people understanding what the laws are, regulations are, what the rules around polling units are, very technical type, what to do with the ballots, ballot papers, how to vote properly. Most civil society organizations and philanthropies, including many of the development partners like the EU and UNDP, spend a lot of money on that close to elections. In between election cycles, we spend money on voter education, that's sort of, and civic awareness, just about the role of being a citizen, transparency, accountability, following the money, especially around health and education budget. So year round, and then a lot of the conversations that we're having is also with young people who want to mobilize in their schools and to rebuild student unionism, which has taken a hit since the military days and has never really come back to its vibrancy. So that's another place we're investing a lot of money in terms of civic awareness raising.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Chichi, we need federal male legislator support. Right. You have 1 minute. Do we?
Yes, absolutely. We do. And like she said, the female legislators are working hard on building allies. What she's talking about is allyship. That is part of the strategies that the sector is using for women, increasing women's political participation. So yes, absolutely. And that we can see in the bill that's ongoing, because Bajabiam Amela is a co-sponsor of that bill, right? That didn't just happen, overnight. And the same thing with some of the other agenda that we have. We're constantly trying to build male allies, both in the lower house and in the upper house, as well as courting allyship of political parties. Again, like we said, this is an uphill task, because some of these institutions do not believe in the fact that gender equality is fundamentally and inherently good for everyone. So that's something we're continuing to do.
Thank you. Inse, the role of law enforcement, because we know that often on election days and indeed during campaigning, women face a lot of violence, especially on election days.
I think that there needs to be a fundamental reimagining of the role of law enforcement and civil society, period. I think that the time where people are afraid of the police, and when they sort of switch to being an occupying force and not seen as a force that's there to keep us all safe, then that is when we lose control. And I don't think that the Nigerian people want to pay for the privilege of being policed by a violent occupying force. And so managing the power dynamics and being very clear about the role of police is something that I think all sectors of Nigerian society are going to have to contend with as we move forward. That we are not looking, again, to pay for the privilege of a private military force that operates on behalf of corporations and elected officials.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're at the end of the show. However, here's what I'm going to say, and once I read this out, I'm going to leave it to the three of you to close, and on that I'm going to give you 10 seconds each. Okay. So I have something here that I wrote. The blueprint of the Beijing Declaration 25 years ago articulated a vision of equal rights, freedom, and opportunities for women everywhere. And I repeat, everywhere, no matter the circumstances. I think that's the one message that I've taken from this. That's the one message I think everybody needs to take away from this. That's the one message that we need to keep repeating and never stop repeating. Inse, what's that one message that you want to leave us with?
That we are the ones that we've been waiting for. There's no cavalry coming. It's completely, totally, wholly up to us. Full stop.
Excellent. Thank you. Chichi.
Gender equality is a public good, and women's participation in politics will lead to sustainable development. Let's get to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Aisha.
Yeah, that we should keep being imaginative, keep challenging many of the myths that we hear about women's political participation or even democracy in Nigeria, and never give up. Just keep pushing. Just never, ever give up.
Excellent. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining the Toyin Falola interviews. The women have spoken. And you heard the women say, we've been speaking, we're not going to stop speaking, we're going to yak till you continue to listen. Thank you. I hope you've had a wonderful time. Prof, a special thanks for putting this together. It's been my absolute honor. I can apologize for my internet, but that would be apologizing for Nigeria. So, oh, somebody's talking to us, I believe.
No, let me thank all of you for participating.
Okay, somebody's talking to us. Okay.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
We're closing now. It's been a very substantive conversation. It has its uniqueness in various dimensions. The speeches, the conversations, the interventions are extraordinarily intelligent, and they contain within them many revolutionary ideas. And as you know, I do reflections on this. I'll be writing reflections on your conversation. The mix of optimism, a small dose of pessimism, but when we combine both, we have a brighter future. The metaphors are great. Thank you very much. Next week, Sunday, we're talking about the war in Cameroon. We don't want war in Nigeria, how processes can be mismanaged. Part of what this conversation is all about is do not let us mismanage ourselves. Thank you very much. And we're very grateful that you're here for your participation. Thank you.
Have a lovely evening. Enjoy the football. I'm going to watch England. Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Orí mi, oníbùrú.